Okay, let's do it.
Let's go.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hi there, Sarita. Hi, Scott. Hi, Trevor. Hey, Mark. Good to see you. Hey, Sam. Hey, Elliot. Hey, Ron. Bruno. So while we wait for everyone to join, if you'd like to share in the chat how you're feeling at this exact moment in 3 words. We'll be starting at 3 minutes past the hour. So how you're sharing, or how you're feeling in this moment in 3 words. For those of you who are able to have your video on, it's lovely to see your faces. Appreciate that. Lots of curious, hungry, and sleepy people today. Okay. All right, let me just share my screen. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to the first kind of content live session. Today we're going to be exploring our modes of being. And this is kind of like pretty foundational piece of the curriculum. And we're going to be starting off with a kind of reflection exercise to kind of go through some of the content from this week's curriculum. We're then going to be doing a autonomic adventure, which I will explain what that means. But it's always a powerful exercise. And then we'll be doing a breakout room session called the noticing game after that as well. So that is the rough flow for today. Before we begin, let's just take a moment to get comfortable, get grounded, kind of feel your butt on your seat. I'm going to return to your body if you've been staring at screens for a while, like I have. Maybe rolling the shoulders back. And let's just take 3 full sighs together. So 3 full breaths. So inhaling through the nose and let it go. And 2 more. You can have an audible sigh on the exhale as well if you like. Inhale. And then 1 more. Full breath in. And just let your body relax or move any way that feels good. Okay. Okay, so we're going to begin with a brief reflection exercise. Does anyone recognize this human? Does anyone know who this is? Feel free to share in the chat. Richard Feynman. Yes, exactly. So he is incredible guy. And he had this practice of inviting his students to pretend to be curious 12-year-olds and sharing something back in their own words. And I think this is a really key aspect of this learning that, at least in my experience, we don't really fully understand something until we attempt to explain it to someone else in our own words. So that's essentially what we're going to be doing. We're going to be going into breakout rooms of 3 and nominate yourselves persons A, B, and C. Person A will attempt to describe the basics of polyvagal theory or the three nervous system modes as they understand it. And then B and C will be curious 12-year-olds listening closely, asking questions, and reflecting back what they hear. So, um, yeah, does this make sense to everyone? Is this clear? Thumbs up if so, and feel free to ask questions if yeah, okay, sounds clear. Great. Okay, so we'll have 6 minutes for this exercise. So spend the first like 4 minutes describing and then the final 2 minutes asking questions. Okay. Ocean, if you'd like to open up the breakout rooms. I think that should be everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Would love to take a few minutes to just hear some reflections. What was that? What was that like? What were some of the things you talked about? Um, any of the metaphors or the images that came up? Feel free to raise your hand and we'll invite you up to the front. What were some reflections? Trevor, hey there.
Hi. One thing that was like an interesting question that was posed was asked, could all three be kind of activated at the same time, if that ever happens, or if it's just two can blend?
Mm, thank you. I think my internet just cut out briefly there, but I think I got the gist of that. Um, the question was, can they be active at the same time and can they be blended states?
Yeah, can all three be blended at the same time, or
Mm,
just two at a time?
interesting. Um, I've talked about this with my breathwork teacher, and um, I'm curious if some of the uh, kind of altered states of consciousness that can happen during breathwork or psychedelics, if what is happening there is all three states are active at the same time, like deep ventral, deep sympathetic, and dorsal, and that can create these kind of like ecstatic bliss states potentially when there's like deep relaxation with activation with ventral. So my sense is, yes, they're all active to some degree all of the time. And if they're all present in a kind of high tone state, my sense is that's where some interesting kind of altered states of consciousness might begin to arise. Again, like
Well,
flaming hot speculation, have no data to prove that, but that's just like it's my sense.
thanks, Johnny.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Um, Keys, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Nope, you're not. It's Case. It's
Keys,
Dutch. So
thank you.
yeah, so we were having an interesting discussion about caged animals in the zoo because we used the person that was describing it used the animals as the main story team, and we were questioning if the dorsal state was the same as being a caged animal.
Mm,
Because when you go to the zoo, you see the lions and they walk around and they're a little bit bored and they don't do much.
mm,
If that's the dorsal state and if that's yeah, that was one thing that was interesting. Another thing was interesting that the person who was describing was talking about flight and fight and trying to link them to those states. And
mm,
we had the question if the fight and the fight and flight response is
mm,
the to which states that is linked.
mm,
So we're sorry, if that was a sympathetic system always, or that it could also be linked to different states.
totally. What do you think? What comes to mind?
Um, no, yeah, it definitely has to do with anxiety, so it has a lot of energy. But I can
Mhm.
also imagine that if it comes too much, it also goes to freeze. So it goes also be a little bit dorsal. It depends on which
Mm,
level of the brain it goes to. So
mm,
if you are still in your animal brain or you're more to your reptilic brain.
yeah, totally. So the free state is a combination of the dorsal and the sympathetic overwhelm at the same time. So there is that activation, but then the dorsal kind of keeps you frozen, which is why
Yeah.
when that begins to thaw, there can sometimes be a lot of activation energy that almost gets like released. And I love the metaphor of a zoo, and I think there's definitely a correlation between learned helplessness, if you're familiar with that phrase, and kind of dorsal states and depression and disassociation. I think there's yeah, a really interesting correlation there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Beautiful. Daniel, welcome.
Yeah, Johnny. So our group was a little bit confused about the dorsal state in a sense. Rahul already posted in the chat the question of whether one can be in dorsal and sympathetic state at the same time, though you already answered that in both of your previous answers. And another question that came up in our group was whether you would ever intentionally go into a dorsal state.
Yeah. So dorsal is I guess there's like the low tone or the healthy version, which is essentially just like a deep rest. So when we're sleeping, when we're deeply relaxing, digesting food, dorsal is present. When it gets into kind of overdrive, which is almost like the emergency handbrake, that is when it's kind of like the protection mechanism. And there are probably not many moments in life where we would kind of actively choose to, unless we were, say, in a lot of pain. Like if we were in extraordinary amounts of pain, it actually would be desirable probably to disassociate and to not be really feeling all of whatever the intense sensation is. So think things like that, or in the aftermath of an accident, things like that. It's common, and I still think it's adaptive, certainly in the short term.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. Beautiful. Well, let's have a few more. These are great. Can you help me pronounce your name, please? I don't want to embarrass myself again.
It's Mariluz.
Mariluz, thank you. Hi there.
Yeah. What about healthy stress? Where would it be? Like, I don't know if he's sympathetic overwhelm or dorsal shutdown or a combination or ventral. I don't know.
Yeah, great. It's a great question. I think about this in terms of the so-called window of tolerance, which I think was in the curriculum this week. And essentially, when we can remain present with ourselves, with our sensations, with our environment, and feel grounded, then in the short term, stress is really helpful and really adaptive. When the level of stress goes beyond our capacity to remain kind of present with it, that's kind of the edge of our window of tolerance. And then the kind of red and blue zones are the hypoarousal or the hyperarousal, which are kind of the adaptive responses for too much stress in our body. And we all have different windows, and we can certainly train and practice to increase our capacity to be present in intensity. So, and then the crucial piece as well is any amount of stress, if prolonged for a period of time, isn't good. It creates allostatic load in the body. So being able to downshift and relax after periods of stressful output is really important as well.
So it would be like sympathetic.
Yes. So sympathetic is basically activation energy, arousal energy, aliveness, like go, get shit done.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Okay. Yeah, let's do a couple more. Hi there.
Hey, yeah, so I have a question. When I learn about ventral connection state, right, it's described as this feeling of connectedness when you want to connect with other people. And I wonder, what does it look like for introverted people? Because, I'm not sure if I feel that even when I'm very relaxed or at ease. So yeah.
Yeah, beautiful question. So I'd say it's also maybe even first and foremost a sense of connection to self. So when I'm trying to think of an example, like I also consider myself an introvert for what it's worth. And if I think of like if I'm sitting on a comfy sofa with a book in my hand, there's like candlelight, and there's just this sense of connection to self is probably what it comes down to, a sense of I feel present with my sensations, thoughts aren't racing, and there is a sense of, it's often correlated with a sense of like open awareness or a sense of like expansiveness. And what else is worth saying about that? Yeah, presence, groundedness, and connection to self is I guess the best way that I can put it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Can I have like the second part of the question?
Yeah,
So
please.
in the same vein, thoughts about when you are in a sympathetic mode,
Mhm.
do you feel willing to connect as well? Because I don't see it mentioned anywhere. Is it a state where we also want to connect or not? I feel
Yeah.
like it's not, and if not, then why so?
Totally. So when sympathetic is blended with the ventral, so kind of red blended with green, that is when I'd say like more activated forms of connection can happen. So for example, let's say like I'm imagining like so a good example, we have two dogs in a house when they're like play fighting, or when kids are like play fighting, where there's like connection, there's like love and maybe friendship, but there's also that kind of intensity as well. A lot of sports, so like rock climbing or surfing, for example, there can be a sense of connection there, but there's also a lot of activation energy as well. Sex is probably a good example as well. So yeah, it's just the different flavors of connection are possible depending on whether the sympathetic is active or the kind of dorsal is active. A kind of blended blue and green or dorsal and ventral would be, much more relaxed. Like imagine people just lying down cuddling, for example. That would be still connection, but more in the blue-green state. Does that make sense? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, these questions are great. Linda, hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
So the question we had was on the passage between the states. So I was the one explaining, and I remember that you can go from dorsal to from dorsal to sympathetic to ventral, but not kind of directly from dorsal to ventral. Is that true? And also, when one is in dorsal and like going to sympathetic is the last thing that they want to do, how does that work? Like, I imagine you're gonna see the tools, but like once you even know the tools, getting yourself to actually do the tools, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. There is a page in the curriculum, I believe it's at the end of week 3, that's called Thawing Dorsal Shutdown, that kind of speaks directly to this. I don't think it's strictly true that you can't go from kind of dorsal to ventral. I think you can, but often, especially when free state has been activated, once dorsal begins to thaw, it will then go into sympathetic and then kind of come down into ventral. As with a lot of this, it's about. I mean, I think your question, like when you're in this dorsal state, the last thing you want to do is a sympathetic activation. That's very true. And I think instead of thinking about it as like, going for a run or something that's like really intense, view it as like very gentle movement. Like it's really more about bringing presence. I think of like breath, sound, and movement as being 3 tools to play with to kind of bring that presence back online. So it could just be like a humming or like a hum or gentle stretching, or just like like maybe my body's just feeling tight and I just want to like move, and that will generally gradually thaw, as opposed to doing something really intense like a breath of fire or a workout or something. I mean, sometimes that can be helpful too, especially if there's like anger that's under the surface, that can be helpful. But generally I think of it as a more gentle, gradual process. And I think Ocean's linked to the section that is all about this. But it's a great question. Thanks. Okay, let's just do one more because I want to make sure we have time for the exercises today. George, is that correct?
It's Torge. Nice to meet
Torge.
you.
I'm butchering
Yeah.
names today.
I just had a quick question. So the sympathetic and the dorsal nervous system both have dysfunctional states, right? Hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And I was wondering, is there such a thing as like a dysfunctional ventral state? Or is it just like the perfect state kind of in the middle?
Yeah, so it's the ventral, you can think of like I like the idea of like the band of green being the ventral, and then the sympathetic at the top being red, and then the dorsal at the bottom being blue. And you can expand ventral so that you can have that online with the sympathetic and the dorsal at the same time. Ventral is another way of saying presence and connection to self, as I kind of mentioned earlier. So there isn't really a dysregulated aspect of ventral. It's more a kind of general indicator of I feel connected to myself, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, I'm going to move on to our exercise just so that we have sufficient time. But thank you for the great questions. Okay, so we're going to be going through this autonomic adventure. I want to open with this quote. I think it's in the curriculum a few times, but this idea that knowledge is only a rumor until it lives in the muscle. And so far, our knowledge of polyvagal theory is very much intellectual. And so this is a opportunity of hopefully kind of feeling into and mapping the somatic felt sense differences between these three states. So that is the purpose of this. And this kind of autonomic adventure, or cycling through these three branches, will be starting off in the ventral vagal, moving down into the dorsal, and then firing up into the sympathetic, and then resting back into the ventral. So that's kind of the arc of the journey. And before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that if you were to imagine a scale between 1 to 10, if 10 is like full sympathetic activation or overwhelm or dorsal shutdown, we're only aiming for like a 2 or a 3 out of 10. So the purpose of this exercise is to become more attuned to the kind of subtle early warning signs of these states, as opposed to going all the way in. So does that make sense to everyone? Can everyone just thumbs up that two or 3 out of 10? Great. Perfect. So before we begin, again, make sure that you're sitting comfortably, kind of coming back into your body. Headphones are ideal for this exercise if you have access to them. We'll be using music to